Welcome to the class. So we were learning about the human reproductive system, and we learned about the male reproductive system, the ducts, the cells, and some of the androgens that are involved in the proper functioning of the male reproductive system. So in today's class, let us start off with understanding the female reproductive system. Now, when we're talking about the female reproductive system, we have a few important, you know, parts. Okay, so let us see what they are and how each one of them is, kind of important as the reproductive system as a whole. Now, talking about the female reproductive system, the female reproductive system consists of the most important part of the reproductive system, which is called as the ovaries. Now, why we say that as very important is because it is at this place that the eggs are actually formed. Okay, so ovaries are important parts, which there are uh, two ovaries, a pair of ovaries, along with a pair of one more important part, which is called as the oviducts. Then we have a sac-like structure which helps in the development, the growth of the embryo, which is called as the uterus. And then we have a region which is called as the cervix. Then we have the opening which helps in insemination, which is called as the vagina, and all this is uh, covered with many folds which we call as the external genitalia, right? Now all this are present in the pelvic region, and the pelvic region will act like a base for all the structures, gives enough support, gives enough, the structure is such that it helps in the development of the embryo. Also, along with this, there is a pair of mammary glands. Now, these are the most important part again for nourishing the child after it's born. Okay, for the birth and child care, for the child care especially, there is importance of mammary glands. So in this class, let us try to study about these structures in a bit detail. Suppose we try to take a section of this uh, female reproductive system. You see that there is a pelvic base, and on the pelvic base there is a sac like structure which is the uterus. Uterus is just above the urinary bladder. Okay, so this would be the urinary bladder, and just above that we have the uh, uterus, right? And then you also notice that there is this which is the large uh, intestine. That's a part of the large intestine, and then we have majority of the reproductive system like the cervix, vagina, and the external genitalia, which attach to the uterus and form the base of the pelvic wall here, right? So this is how the structure of the female reproductive system is, right? Now let us talk about the ovaries and learn more about the oviducts and the uterus. So if you're talking about that, you see that these peanut shaped, peanut sized small ovaries, so they are around 2 to 4 centimeter. Now these are the ovaries. Now we call these two as the primary female sex organ. That is mainly because these are the ones which produces ovum. These are the ones which produces ovum, and not only ovum, you see that they also produce a good number of hormones, okay, uh, ovarian hormones, and these you generally see that they are located in the lower side of our abdomen, okay. So one is on the right side, the other one is on the left side. So this is how you see that there are two ovaries present on the lower abdomen region. So this ovary, if you just notice here, you see that one part of it is connected to the pelvic wall. Okay, so the pelvic is behind here. So you can see that there is one region which is connected to the pelvic wall in this region, and the other region is connected to the uterine wall. Right. So you see that this is kind of in its place because of some of the tissues which help them to be between the pelvic wall and the uterine wall, and we call them as ligaments, right. So each ovary you see is covered by, okay, suppose this is the ovary. I will be showing you one more structure when we are talking about this formation of the ovum. It has a outer layer, okay, it has a outer layer, very thin epithelial cells, and this is what we call as the ovarian, it is called as the ovarian stroma, okay. Now the stroma, if you just look here, it is divided into two important zones. You have the outermost region here, which is called as the cortex, outer cortex, and then we have the inner region which is called as the medulla. So you see that when we are talking about the female ovary system, you see that the stroma is important because it is kind of covering the entire ovary, and this stroma is divided into two regions, the peripheral region and the inner medulla region, right. So this is how the ovary is. Now comes the most important part, the next one, which is again the oviduct. Okay, oviduct is very commonly called as the fallopian tubes. Oviducts are called as the fallopian tubes. Uh, the fallopian tubes, the uterus, and the vagina, all these are basically, you can say them as the accessory ducts. Okay, you can say them as accessory ducts. This fallopian tube is somewhere from this part to say the end of this part. Okay, so this entire region is what we call as the fallopian tube. Now looking there directly, you see that the tip of this fallopian tube is like a projected finger, and we call that as the fimbriae. Okay, this is called as the fimbriae. So this produces egg, right. Now this egg will be released, it is released, and this fimbriae catches it. Okay, it is kind of help to collect the ovum after its after ovulation. Now this is the first part. Just after the fimbriae, we have one more region which is called as the infundibulum, which is more or less like our palm. Okay. Now infundibulum is slightly wider. Okay, and this kind of helps in the transfer of the ovulated ovum and goes into a narrower region which is called as the ampulla. Then comes much more narrower region which is called as the last part of the fallopian tube, which is called as the isthmus. Now isthmus is very narrow, and you see that as the isthmus moves there, it finally opens up into this region, and this region is what we call as the uterus. Okay, now this is the most interesting part of the female reproductive system. Very interesting because it aids in the development of the embryo, right. So you see that there is one single uterus, okay, and we call that as the womb. You can see that it is more or less like a V shape with a cap. Okay, uh, it is like that, and you see that it stays in its place because it is kind of attached to the pelvic wall behind. Okay, it is attached to the pelvic wall. Now we let us see how this uterus structure is. You see that the uterus structure is made up of it's kind of quite thick, right? It is made up of so many membranes. Okay, so we have the outermost membrane of the uterus, which is called as the perimetrium. Please do remember, peri is always outside, so outside membrane, that is the perimetrium. Now inside there is this muscular structure which is called as the myometrium. Myometrium is always considered to be very thick. It's a smooth muscle. So you know what smooth muscles are. So they have the ability to move. Again, you know, myometrium is very important because this has the ability to contract and relax, and this also aids uh, in the birth of the child. Okay, during child labor, you see the myometrium has a very important role to play. And then we have one more layer, which is shown in the light red here, which is called as the endometrium. Endo again inside, metrium is the membrane, the innermost membrane. Okay, now innermost membrane, again you see it is very different than the perimetrium and the myometrium. And you know why? It is because this size of the endometrium is not constant. It shows something that we call as the cyclical changes. Okay, so I think you would have studied in your lower classes that you know, female reproductive system exhibits something that we call as the menstrual cycle. So in the menstrual cycle, you know, you see that the endometrium size varies uh, a lot. Okay, varies a lot, which we will see further in some time. So this is about the uterus. Now as we come down the uterus, you see a small cavity region which is called as the cervix. Okay, cervix is you can see that this is a very important region. It's a small canal like thing which helps in the childbirth. Okay, we will also call it as the birth canal or the cervical canal. Okay, so that is the cervix, again quite important uh, because this produces certain you know, liquid, some I would say secretions, which actually helps in the intake of the human sperms only, which allows human sperms only into the uterine sac later. Okay, so that is about the cervix and the canal that we were talking about, the cervical canal. Now after the cervical canal, you see one more small region here which is called as the vagina. Vagina is basically the opening, a very important region because it is through this vagina that insemination can actually happen. So you see that the lower part of the vagina is actually having a protective layer of a membrane which is called as the hymen. It's called as the hymen layer, a very very thin membrane structure which is actually present on the lining, you know, which kind of blocks the vagina here. And you see that till the girl reaches puberty, there is a very intact hymen, and after the girl, you know, will have her first sexual intercourse, most of the times the hymen breaks open and the insemination would actually happen. But however, we should know that hymen is not always intact because a sudden fall or maybe active participation in sports, all that would lead to the rupture of the hymen. And also we should know that, you know, not always a sexual intercourse would happen in or would result in the loss of hymen. many times we do notice that even after the sexual intercourse, there can be the hymen which can be intact. So hymen is basically, the mid part for the internal reproductive system organs and the external genitalia. So this is what our vagina is at the end and the tip of the female reproductive system. Now talking about the external genitalia, you see the external genitalia is actually kind of covering the vagina just to see that there is some kind of specificity, some kind of filter that would uh, allow only very specific um, very specific insemination to happen. You see that the vagina is opening and can actually get infected quite easily, and therefore there is a layer and layers of membranes on this vagina which kind of uh, cover the vaginal opening. Okay, so one of the most outermost covering is what we call as the mons pubis. This is a very cushiony fatty tissue that is covering the uh, vagina. Okay, then comes the folds which are called as the labia. Okay, there are two of them here. One which is quite thicker, which is called as the labia majora, and then we have the labia minora, right? Then inside this folds of the labia minora, we see that the vagina is there, which is covered by the hymen. Okay, so this is how we have the female reproductive system. But please do remember that we are viviparous and we have to take care of the young ones, and mammary glands help us to do that part, of the function. Now mammary glands basically have a different type of role. You see that these are basically a paired structure in the case of humans, and what is very important is the presence of the glandular tissue. Okay, there is the presence of glandular tissue. There are so many glands which are called as the lactiferous glands. Okay, we call them as the lactiferous glands. Very important glands because these are the ones which produce the milk, okay, through which you see the milk is produced and comes out. Then you also see that there is a variable amount of fat that is present. Okay, so on an average you see that there are around lobes which are called as the mammary loops. These are called as the mammary loops. So we have around 15 to 20 mammary lobes each on an average, and these are made up of small tiny sac like structures which are called as the mammary alveoles. Okay, we call it as alveolus or alveoli in the case of plural. So there is mammary alveoli. Now this mammary alveoli would secrete milk, and these are stored in the small cavities which are called as the cavities of alveoli or the lumens of alveoli. Now this would break into the ducts, mammary ducts, and many mammary ducts would finally give rise to a larger duct which is called as the lactiferous duct, and through the lactiferous duct you see that the milk is sucked out. So this way we have the female reproductive system, and I am sure you would have noticed that the structure of the male reproductive system and the female reproductive system is highly different, obviously, because the type of gametes that they would produce and the type of care and nurture for the young ones that they would do is entirely different. So how exactly do they produce gametes and what are the gametes that they produce? Now that process is what we call as the gametogenesis, and let us learn more about the gametogenesis in this class. So basically we have studied about the sex organs, the primary sex organs. In the case of male it is testis, and in the females it is called as the ovaries. Now these primary sex organs are involved in producing or making the gametes. The gametes are the sperms and the ovum. The process of making this is what we call as the gametogenesis, right? So obviously when the system is different and the gametes are different, you see that the gametogenesis is also obviously different. So let us study about the male gametogenesis now. Okay, we have the male gametogenesis. Male gametogenesis, we also call this male gametogenesis as spermatogenesis, because at the end of male gametogenesis what we get is sperms. So we call this as spermatogenesis. Okay, so we have the germ cells. I'm sure you remember where we see this germ cells and then the Leydig cells and many more. We have gone through that. So if you are not sure, please listen to that video once more. Okay, so we have the immature cells. These immature male germ cells are called as the spermatogonia. Okay, we call that as the spermatogonia. So this was in the seminiferous tubule, right? So we have this spermatogonia which has this immature cells, and always there is a continuous supply of this would undergo division. I will be explaining to you very soon. So we have lot of spermatogonia here, and these are present inside the seminiferous tubules, right? Now this spermatogonia would undergo a process of mitosis. Okay, they would undergo a process of mitosis and would increase in their number. Okay, here this is multiplied by n times, so you can do that, right? Please do not consider this to be x. In biology, x is the chromosome, so here I'm just telling to say that it is just increasing it in its number. Okay, so every spermatogonium is always increasing in number, and this is by multiplying by the mitotic division, and you see that throughout a man's life there is this spermatogonium present, right? Now the spermatogonium is always diploid in nature. And why is this diploid? Because they are dividing mitotically, right? These are dividing mitotically. Now some of the spermatogonium cells would kind of keep moving into the inner region, and as they keep moving into the inner region, you see that they undergo slight modification in their structures, and then we call them as the primary spermatocytes. So basically the same spermatogonium which are in the periphery would move towards the inside, and we call such cells as the primary spermatocytes. These primary spermatocytes are undergoing meiosis. So this was undergoing mitosis. Now this primary spermatocytes would undergo the process of meiosis. Now you know what is the product of meiosis. Now whenever there is meiosis we should get 4 cells, right? Now a primary primary spermatocyte would undergo the first meiotic division. Okay, so you know how it happens. It is like haploid reductional division, right? So you see that there are two spermatocytes that are formed. We call them as the secondary spermatocyte, right? Now this secondary spermatocytes would undergo the second meiotic division to give us the spermatozoa or the sperms, which are, you know, of haploid in nature. So just to be very sure here, please do remember, primary spermatocyte is diploid. It undergoes the first meiotic division to give us the secondary spermatocytes, which are haploid. Secondary spermatocyte would again divide to give us, you know, uh, undergo meiotic division to give us sperm-like structure, which are haploid in nature, and we call them as the spermatids. Now these spermatids would undergo some kind of modification morphologically, and we call them as the spermatozoa. And the whole process of a spermatogonium forming a spermatozoa is what we call as the spermiogenesis. Okay, so spermiogenesis is the process of a diploid spermatogonium becoming a primary spermatocyte, a haploid secondary spermatocyte, spermatid, which is undergone the second meiotic division as well, morphologically transformed into spermatozoa, and this is what we call as the spermiogenesis. Now after spermiogenesis, you see that there is a sperm head that comes embedded. Okay, so there is a sperm on which there is one new head that is formed, and this new head comes with the help of another cell which is there in the seminiferous tubule. If you think of it, we call that as the Sertoli cells. So Sertoli cells will provide that head for the sperm cells, and these are released from the seminiferous tubules. So this is inside, in the center there is a seminiferous tubule. So these are released into the seminiferous tubule through a process which we call as the spermiation. We call this entire process as spermiation, right? Now the whole of this spermatogenesis would actually start uh, only after or during puberty. Now during till puberty, what would happen is there are the cells which we call as the spermatogonium, but the cells, the hormones required for them to undergo meiotic division are still not there. Okay, now during puberty, we see that there is a very important hormone which is called as the GnRH. GnRH is the gonadotropin releasing hormone. Okay, this is basically produced by the hypothalamus, and this is acting on the pituitary gland, and this again activates two more hormones which are LH and FSH. LH is nothing but the luteinizing hormone, and then FSH is the follicle stimulating hormone. So there are these two hormones which are secreted again by the action of gonadotropin releasing hormone. Okay, now what this LH does is it goes directly, acts on the Leydig cells, and you know what Leydig cells do? Leydig cells are involved in the secretion of androgens. Okay, now these androgens would get activated, the cells would get activated, produce androgens, and these androgens would enter into the spermatogonium or the seminiferous tubule and activate the whole process of spermatogenesis. So basically GnRH activating LH, activating the Leydig cells, androgens activating the spermatogonium, releasing and forming and releasing the sperms. But you know what? FSH is completely different. Now, FSH is not acting on this at all. In fact, FSH acts on Sertoli cells, right? FSH acts on Sertoli cells, and what would happen if they act on Sertoli cells? You see that when they act on the Sertoli cells again, Sertoli cells are the ones which kind of provide nutrition, right? And also makes the cap of our sperm. You see that this Sertoli cells get activated, and thus in turn the whole of the spermatogenesis is activated, right? So this is how you see the whole of spermatogenesis involves series of hormones, and all the hormones start produced during puberty, and the production of sperms happens throughout a man's life. So throughout a man's life, you see that there is spermatogenesis, which gives rise to the formation of sperm. Now, how are these sperms? Now, sperms are very simple structures, a structure which resembles more or less like a virus, but yes, not with that 6 tails, but we have only 1 tail here, right? So basically, this whole structure of a sperm can be divided into uh, 4 different regions. The first region is the head. This small region is called as the neck, and then we have this region which is called as the middle piece, and then there is this long tail like structure. Okay, now you see that there is the whole of the sperm which is present here. You see that it is having a plasma membrane covering. Obviously it has to have that, right? You see the plasma membrane that is present there, and the neck region is the region where there is the the chromosomes that are present. Okay, not chromosomes, actually there is this haploid nucleus that is present inside. So haploid nucleus is present inside this neck, uh, and you also see that this upper region of this head is covered by a small cap like structure, a topi. Now this is what we call as an acrosome. Okay, acrosome is I would say like a very important region for the sperm, because this carries all the enzymes required for the nucleus to be released inside the egg. You know that the nucleus, this whole sperm goes in, should go inside the egg, and the nucleus should get fused with the nucleus of the egg. Now for this entire process to happen, the first foremost thing is that the egg membrane has to be kind of crash it through so that the sperm enters. Now the enzymes required to digest that egg, not the egg completely, the membrane of the egg, are present in this acrosome. There are huge number of enzymes, and all these are helping in the fertilization of the egg. Okay, now comes this region which is the neck. Neck is again very important because it is through this that this nucleus or the head, it is attached to the middle piece, uh, not more than that function we see there. Then comes the middle piece. Now the middle piece is again, you see, is very rich in mitochondria. Okay, why mitochondria? Because this is slightly a different kind of cell. This does not have many other organelles. In fact, you can do that activity, find out which organelles are not present inside the sperm cell. So you see that there is this middle piece, and middle piece has a lot of mitochondria, one of the most actively seen organelles in the sperm. That is required because the sperm actually has to move from its place of origin and reach the egg. Egg moves only through that fallopian tube, right? that's the place where it moves. Now here this sperm has to travel a lot, right? It has to have that motility, and for movement there is requirement of energy, and the energy comes from the mitochondria, right? So there are so many mitochondria which are actively involved, and they all produce a good amount of energy, right? Now comes you know how many of them would be released. Now every time a human male ejaculates, we see that there are around 200 to 300 million sperms that would be released. 200 to 300 million. And as shown in many movies, you see that there is a very strong competition between them on them itself. They have to reach the egg, right? And you see that out of 200 to 300 million sperms, out of them, on around 60% will have normal shape, normal size, and at least out of those 60%, 40% must show vigorous motility, so that actual fertilization would happen. Okay, so this comes out of the seminiferous tubules, transported through accessory ducts, goes into epididymis, then vas deferens, seminal vesicles, then it also goes through the prostate, and during all these times you see that the sperms are matured. Okay, the sperms get matured. There is some kind of structural changes, chemical changes also that would happen. Now along with this, because of the action of many other glands that are present, you see that the seminal plasma along with the sperm, okay, it travels through many of the ducts that we mentioned, and finally what is seen is a fluid which consists of many which consists of water, which consists of sperms, along with many other secretions from various glands, and that is what we call as the semen, right? Now all this are very important kind of steps for the formation of uh, the sperms. Now comes the formation of ovum, and obviously this is completely different from that of the spermatogenesis. We call that process as the oogenesis, which we will see in our next class. Okay, hope you have understood and you do not have any doubts. If you have any, make a note of it. We will discuss about that in our next class. See you.